5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
How about we do it again?
6, 7, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think I fallen.
Okay, let's try one more
I
time.
definitely.
Ready?
I can move you. Making review. Making review.
Say
6,
5.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to another action-packed edition of Rank and Review. I am your host and random Canadian Larry Parsons, and you've come to an interesting episode. We are returning once again to historic horrors, and my guest is the always entertaining Mr. Matthew Risling. By now, if you've been listening to the podcast, you know that we deal in spoilers and that we use adult language, but I hope you just decide to press on anyway. If you have feedback to give me, you can do that. You can send me feedback at ranknreview@gmail.com. That's ranknreview@gmail.com. Thank you so much for supporting Rank and Review. Tell a friend. And now let's get on with it, shall we? So, welcome back to the podcast once again, Mr. Matthew Risling, all the way from far-off romantic Toronto, Ontario, Canada.
Oh God, this summer has been so long without any new episodes.
We're back up and running. We're recording this in September. This probably won't be dropping until November, though. We're going to talk about some more historic horrors. This is the third time that we're sort of tackling this specific topic. And you picked this list out of many. So why historic horrors?
Very similar to the way that I tend to pick your lists is I like to pick lists that don't have too much scene.
Right.
It had The Witch, which is... I saw it a long time ago. Not a long time ago, it's not that old, but I saw it quite a while ago, and I remember liking it. And then I thought, if everything else is The Witch caliber, then this should be a pretty good list. The other one, which maybe this will even bleed into the first review, maybe not, but the movie Gothic, it has one of the great cinematic horror covers of all time, right. With sort of that play on that famous painting, The Nightmare. And when I was a little kid at the video store, I always saw that little imp perched on that woman's chest, and it was looking straight at me, and it really haunted me. And I had a huge appetite for slasher movies, ghost movies to some extent, but I was really into Friday the 13th and Sleepaway Camp. But that movie always seemed a little too scary for me.
Couldn't handle it. And you waited all these years.
Yeah.
So this was the first time you went in absolutely unprepared for Gothic?
Yeah, I had never read up on it. I didn't know anything. Over the years, I had come to realize that the cover was a play on a famous painting, but that's all I knew.
Right. Well, we'll get into it. I really like these movies that are set in... Well, generally speaking, I find movies that are set in historic times tend to age better. Anytime you make a movie that's really current and really now, it's sort of like doomed to be, oh, that's so 90s, oh, that's so 80s, oh, that's so whatever. But if you pick a period and you can reflect it authentically, I think it helps your movie. And that's the real thing, is that gets me into it. Even though some of these are going to be bigger budget than others, is, do I believe that this is set in period? Do I accept the atmosphere? And if I do, it goes a long way for me. It almost feels like it's a different genre. It's just a horror movie in a different period, but it somehow makes the movie feel bigger to me. So I'm a big fan.
I definitely think that at least one and a half movies on this list will be timeless. Right. I almost... One of them will for sure stand the test of time, but there's another one, which we will talk about much later, that was a surprise, not quite favorite, but a surprise, surprisingly enjoyable to me. And I think it will probably age well.
Right.
Some of them not so much, but you know.
Well, I don't know what more I want to say about this. I guess we can just duck into them. Is there anything you want to say before I list off these movies and we jump into the episode?
No, let's get to it.
Okay, well, the 6 historic horror films that Matthew Risling and I are going to review this episode. We have Gothic from infamous director Ken Russell. We have an anthology of animated Edgar Allan Poe adaptations called Extraordinary Tales. We have a really bizarre psychological horror film called The Falling. We have a telling of what is supposedly the first case of a supernatural entity claiming a life in The American Haunting. We have Stonehurst Asylum from the director of one of my favorite horror movies, Session 9. And last but not least, we will discuss The Witch. You're breathing heavy into your mic, dude.
Say that again?
You're breathing pretty heavy in your mic. I'm hearing a lot of...
Sorry, I'll keep it away from my face.
Stop breathing so much, dude. You're wrecking the podcast.
I need it to live.
I read that somewhere. You do need to breathe to live. So yes.
Okay, tell me if I'm breathing heavily into the mic, because I don't want this to be your impression that your listeners have of me.
Yeah. That's the sort of the fun thing about the podcast. Nobody really knows it. Well, people that know us know what we look like, but a lot of people have to fill in the blanks, so they don't know that you're like this huge trucker dude with a Klondike beard, and that your gut won't fit into any t-shirt, right? But they can imagine you're George Clooney, right? They don't know that my nose takes up 2/3 of my face. That's fine. Yeah. They don't need to. I think that's enough of a tangent. Let's do this.
And there, ladies and gentlemen, on the other side of the lake, we have the famous Villa Diodati, where Lord Byron, greatest living English poet, resides in exile. He was forced to leave his native land after many scandals. Mad, bad, and dangerous to know, she called him.
Tell the truth, Albert. He's the devil.
Show them your cloven hoof.
Isn't your theory that lightning can endow a lifeless being with life? To create a ghost story is nothing but to create a ghost. Let death be our witness. Our minds will do the rest. This is not a game. Gaze into the eyes. Conjure up your darkest fear. Call me to fall.
We have to leave now, all of us.
It's no good. You can't run away from your own fears.
Is there no escape from this madhouse?
And our punishment is that we have created.
So, Ken Russell's Gothic from 1986. Wow. It's interesting, during the introduction you were talking about remembering this VHS case. And yeah, this little demonic figure is hunched over top of Natasha Richardson. And it's like this succubus creature. It's like sucking her nightmares out or smothering her or something. But it always looked scary to me. And I guess unlike you, I wasn't too scared to watch it. So I saw this movie at a very young age. And it was impenetrable. So, again, I had no idea who Percy Shelley was. I had no idea who like all these historical figures were when I watched it originally. So I decided to give it another shake as an adult human being when I randomly bumped into it used. And, well, here we go. Ken Russell is going to tell the story of this night where all of these creative minds get together. I can't remember the name of the author who wrote the original vampire book.
Oh, I had it written down, and then I can't. It's
and of course Mary and Percy Shelley, They're all hanging out in this big mansion, and they're doing a lot of drugs. They're having a lot of sex, and they're having those crazy sort of creative outpouring, perhaps, or is it just madness? And well, that's the question that really I'm going to pose to you as an introduction. Like, is it just madness? Is there any like meat to this thing? Like, like it really seems to me like the cast is trying to overact each other, because there's some good actors, and there's Julian Sands.
Yeah, this is part one of our Julian Sands double feature.
And it seems like everyone's trying to top each other in how big they're playing it and just the craziness of the roles. So it's hard to look away from, but it's also really hard to recommend. So I guess I throw the ball to you, Matthew. Is it just madness?
My read on it, which is one of the many reasons I found it disappointing, is I thought the ultimate idea at the end is it's like this terrifying, sublime creativity manifest. Like, there's just, when you get this much creative energy together and it's unbounded, and then everybody has to scream, and like you said, everybody's in a competition about who can yell the loudest or cry the most or just emote, just non-stop emoting.
I think Julian Sands is the one who becomes the most unintentionally hilarious of the group. Although Gabriel Byrne certainly has his moments. And Timothy Spall, who plays Dr. Polidori, who would go on to write this vampire novel, is like this really crazy, creepy, sweaty-looking, like, fop character. And I liked his performance maybe the most of everybody. For sure. I mean, I guess his character gave him more of leeway to be as crazy as he was. Whereas I think these other people were supposed to be sort of creative geniuses. We were supposed to sort of respect their art, you know? I think what struck me about watching it as an adult is that Ken Russell might have actually gotten shockingly close to authentic in a few ways, in that, yeah, maybe all these people did get together, and maybe it was a dark and stormy night, and maybe they did a bunch of chemicals, and they were just idiots. They just acted like insane people, like people who are doing a lot of drugs do. I mean, I'm sure they're not the first people who ever thought, you know, I'll be a better writer if I'm chemically enhanced or if I'm, off my ass drunk. But typically the results aren't that great. And when the movie tries to imply inspiration, like that lightning is the sort of creative energy force of life, it's interesting because it's not even implicitly said in Frankenstein that it's lightning that brings the creature to life. That's all been an invention of Hollywood, but the movie keeps nodding at this, you know.
Yeah, well, although, if I might, because I want to kind of defend this movie a little bit before I further tear into it, in that there were some, like, this was the movie he really wanted to make. He put a lot of effort into certain things. So at the beginning, when Shelley is rattling off that bit about lightning striking a tree, that's actually from the first chapter of Frankenstein. So the monster isn't brought to life by lightning, but lightning is heavily featured, and they're quoting from it verbatim. Although it was curious to me why they had Percy Shelley quote from the novel as if to say that his wife just was sort of riding his coattails. Like, it was weird that she wasn't quoting from the novel that she would later write.
And that happens again and again when Gabriel Byrne's naked in the storm standing on the roof. He's screaming about how lightning is a creative force of the universe. And they flash to her face, yeah, make a note of this. I'll include this in my writing. It kind of takes some of her... it takes credit away from Mary Shelley in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's like, damn, women writers have had it too good for too long. When are the men gonna get their shake?
Exactly. When are white males gonna get their due? But the problem
there
is...
were also...
Sorry?
Just while we're going to the literary stuff, and only because, you know, I got a degree in 18th century literature, so this is sort of like my area, but there were some points where it seemed like they were Forrest Gumping their way through every little bit of 18th century culture.
Right.
So, like, the Fuseli painting, which is it's the main image, and was a terrifically well recreated image in the movie. There's no reason to think that was at Byron's house. That was probably in a museum. Well, there were a couple of copies, but there's no reason to think he had one of the original. There's a point where Julian Sands is after his first freak out, and he's splashing water on his face, and it's from this urn, this tub of goldfish, which is recalling this old poem about ode on a favorite cat drowned in a tub of goldfish. And like, yeah, that happens sort of historically adjacent-ish, but you don't have to hit every single thing that you know about literature from that period, which is apparently 3 or 4 things.
Well, worse than that is I don't feel like I learned anything. Like, I didn't feel enriched by watching the movie. It's not that stuff that stuck with me. It was like boobs with eyeballs on them. Or that, like...
Oh, sorry, I'm going to pause you. That was one of my notes, which I was really confused about, because I had eye boobs, ! And it wasn't until you just said it now that I remembered it. But that was a terrific image.
Like, what the fuck, right? And there's a scene where Julian Sands encounters this weird, I don't know what you call it, supposedly automated China doll that does a striptease for him. Is it real? Is it a hallucination? Is it inspiration for his poetry? Or is it just a random nonsensical scene in the middle of this movie that is kind of random and nonsensical?
Well, that's another one, I think, where they're Forrest Gumping their way through the 18th century, because those Swiss clockwork dolls were really popular, and they had some really creepily surreal automata that people were really into. And this is again where I'm going to give props to a bad movie, but there were a couple of set pieces that I thought were really good, and that was one of them.
Yeah,
it looked good. I mean, it was pointless, just like the whole movie, but it looked really good. Like, as far as if this had been like 3 separate art house shorts that just had experimental music and those few images, they would have been really good, I think.
Right. I think that, like I said, we've been tough on the acting, but I think everybody was trying to meet the craziness of the script, and they were being directed to play it over the top and big. In this sort of soup of big performances, Miriam Sear, who plays Claire Claremont, sort of stands out for me. She was the girl with the big bushy brunette hair that looked like she had an 80s
eye boobs.
Perm. And she had the eye boobs, exactly. I should have just gone right to that. She, in particular, is highly sexualized throughout the movie and spends a lot of the movie running around laughing or screaming. And I honestly don't understand what role she plays in the story or in the movie. She kind of sticks out, which is weird considering how crazily big people are playing it. When last you were on the podcast, you were talking about Gabriel Byrne in Miller's Crossing and how he's never really had really great roles to shine. Well, bite your tongue.
Well, he won some awards from this movie. This was well received back in 1986 in certain... I mean, he didn't win an Oscar or anything, but like European festivals and stuff.
An art house hit.
I think this was like a breakout performance for him.
Well, maybe got him noticed. I mean, I don't know. I certainly didn't know who Gabriel Byrne was until probably around the time of Miller's Crossing. So,
well, here, I have a take on why everything was so big.
Okay.
Which goes to my larger theme of these movies that, better or worse, I think almost all of these movies are the movies that the director really wanted to make.
Right.
And I think the point was very deliberate, because the whole Byron Shelley circle, that era of romantic literature is the first era where literature becomes about sort of these spontaneous creative energies, and the idea of artistic inspiration is kind of emerging out of them, which is a sort of a philosophy of creativity that I absolutely hate. If we're going to call back to our controversial Coen Brothers podcast, that was something that I thought Barton Fink was making fun of, this idea of inspiration, and you get overtaken by the spirit. But I think the point of this movie was like this creative spirit manifest, and of course it would flow through the Shelley Byron circle, because they're the ones that really pioneered the idea.
Right. Well, again, for me, I put myself in the shoes of the people in the villa across the lake who are watching these people through the spyglasses. You know, they're like they're trying to catch glimpses of what at the time were major celebrities. It would be like, I don't know, catching a glimpse of Kanye or something like this and doing his creative muse. But to me, what I would see looking through these glasses were a bunch of crazy people screaming at each other and crying and beating their chests and being, absolutely unbearable to be around. Excuse me.
Yeah, it would have been good if halfway through the movie a neighbor was like pounding on the door. Keep it down in there, you kids!
But I mean, I don't know if I want that scene where I saw that Percy Shelley was a creative genius, or that I saw Lord Byron, focus this weird, what seems like evil intent into a creative outlet. But all I see is just bad people being awful to each other. It didn't.
Yeah, well,
I didn't see the inspiration, and I didn't feel inspired by them. But I had a hard time looking away from it. There is something about the movie, like it keeps you watching, no matter how crazy the performance or how random the next scene seems to be. It doesn't jar you out of it the way typically a David Lynch film will eventually shake me off. Like, I stayed with the movie, but I'm not sure that it paid off, that it repaid me for my patience.
I don't know if this is along those lines, but you made me think of it. Because it's got this certain frenetic energy that it's setting up. How did you react to the framing device? The modern day tourists that were catching a glimpse of the house.
It didn't make a very big impression on me, to be honest. I remembered it as you were speaking of it.
Okay. It seemed an awful choice to me, and very, talking about a movie that makes you want to look away, like that part. I mean, I guess it was at the very end, in the very beginning, but, I just couldn't tell what it was even doing here. All of a sudden, it seemed like a BBC One production.
It's weird. You know what it maybe was trying to be, and why I'm having trouble with it? It's like a somehow snootier Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. We're seeing these damaged but really, really gifted people, but I'm seeing the damaged, but I'm not seeing the gifts. Like, I'm not seeing the creativity penetrate through, either because of the creative, inspiration, or because of actually getting down to the work. Either way, we just don't see it.
Yeah, none of them struck me as anybody that could write great literature, which is probably because they weren't writing great literature on opium highs while running around a house.
Right.
Just a lot of sitting down at a table and doing drafts and stuff.
They looked like what they were, right? Idiots. Just like it might have been accidentally more authentic than they actually intended, right? I don't necessarily subscribe to that sort of idea that there's some otherworldly thing that you need to tap into to be creative. But I will go so far as to say, if you get on a good jag of writing, or if you're in a good creative throne, it almost feels like you're just transcribing it. It's you get into that right zone, and some people would almost call it spiritual. I don't think it is, but I understand why people get that feeling, and that creative feeling, I think, is what this movie is trying to be about. But what I would recommend it for is just the craziness of it. Like the ludicrous set pieces, the way over-the-top acting, and sort of the weird kinky nature of the whole movie. It's memorable. Is it good? I don't know.
It's one that, to borrow your phrase, would be a good sound-off one. Like, I could see this playing silently at a hipster bar,
right,
projected onto some sheet in the background or something like that. That would be its, I think, the best place for it. This is what I was going to say that was a bit of a non sequitur, is you said in the intro that one of the nice things about historical horror is they tend to age well. This movie is so 80s.
Right.
It is so of the time that it was made. There's nothing about it that's timeless. Right down to like those when something scary would happen, there'd be a drum solo, but like a Phil Collins type drum solo. I honestly thought he's making this really clumsy reference to I Can Feel It Coming in the Air Tonight, or whatever that song is. But it just made this movie for 1986 and no other year.
And yet that somehow contributes to the madness of the movie too. Like, I think that for a lot of people this would be nails down a chalkboard, and for certain people they could sip wine and eat fancy cheese and talk about how brilliant it was. But mainly I think that it's just one of those movies that's so weird it's worth kind of a look for how weird it is. But again, that doesn't quite, for me, mean it's a recommendation.
I can't think of a single person that I would recommend this to. I mean, except for, like, it's the kind of movie that I would like to see, but I don't think I'll ever see it again. But it's not scary. It's kind of historical, but not really historical. It's just mad. Like, I don't know if there's anybody that likes mad movies, but it's also quite pretentious, which, like, if it had been earnestly mad, that's fine. But I think, what's the name of the director again? Ken Russell?
Yeah.
I think he wanted people to see him as an auteur genius.
Right. He did an infamous movie called The Devils. He did Altered States. He's The Lair of the White Worm. He sort of makes a point of making memorably odd movies. And yes, this is definitely another one of those.
Yeah. I liked The Lair of the White Worm quite a lot, actually, when I was a kid.
Well, someday it will have its time on Rank and Review. Is there anything else you want to say about Gothic?
Nope, just good effort, but I wouldn't watch it if I were you, to whoever's listening to me.
Not if I were you. So how do you feel about Edgar Allan Poe, Matthew?
This movie, Extraordinary Tales, really made me confront that question in a much realer way than I thought I would. I always assumed I liked him, and I like his stories, but I think I might not like his stories as much as I thought I did. Or maybe it's just I'm a little tired of them.
So you think you're kind of worn out on Edgar Allan Poe, is what you're saying?
It could be. This movie, I found it wasn't bad. Like his stories aren't bad, but it wasn't super compelling either.
I guess I'll give a breakdown. I mean, this is an animated anthology of 5 Edgar Allan Poe stories. And all of the short films are done by different directors in different styles of animation. I think in typical anthology movie style, they kind of stand or fall on their own because of their own production. What I would say... Yeah,
I would agree with that.
I would say Extraordinary Tales would work as an interesting introductory, like, if you were trying to get a high school age kid excited about classic literature, you know? Here's a smattering of Poe presented in a very visually cool, kinetic way to give you an idea of what this dude's about. What doesn't come across in these short little vignettes, well, in some cases better than others, the one that Bela Lugosi narrates, I think it kind of comes across, is Poe's liking of the flawed narrator, typically the crazy narrator, who tells you the story from his perspective, and in his perspective, maybe he did some bad things, but he was a genius about it, and he's not mad. It's the world or the scenario that the only reason he got caught was some supernatural twist of fate. And there's something snooty about Poe. There's something uptight, you know, and that doesn't come across. I think that the 5 individual stories are fine. We can talk about them like your favorites or your least as we go through it. I think the big problem for me is the wraparound section. There's a crow or a raven, I must assume.
It's got to be a raven.
Right? that's got Poe's spirit in it, and there's an angel of death that's trying to convince Poe it's time to go to the next place, to the next spiritual plane. And he's fighting it, as people do, and for whatever reason is treated to a recounting of a bunch of his own stories. By the way, if I'm having a near-death experience and someone's going to tell me a bunch of stories, maybe they should tell me stories that I didn't personally write. But that's just me.
Thanks for that. Maybe they just memorized it by rote, and it just so happened that it was him. But like for everybody else that's dying at that time, particularly before they had to study this stuff in high school, like it's a pretty good experience.
Exactly. So again, I'm not passionate about extraordinary tales. I think that if an anthology film of animated Poe stories sounds interesting to you, it's like an hour and 12 minutes of your life. Give it a look. But it's nothing to get super excited about.
Yeah, I would say there's nothing bad about them. There's stories that I like better or worse than others. The one that I've got in my notes, it sounded a lot like Bela Lugosi, and then I looked it up, and it's an old recording. That was a really good. It was a really good narration. I thought that was one of my favorite ones. That was the Telltale Heart. I think the first story was Christopher Lee's last performance. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know where it falls, but it's got to be close to it anyway. Yeah, and he was born to do narration, so.
I read some reviews that were complaining about Guillermo del Toro's narration of The Pit and the Pendulum, but I actually thought he was pretty good. Like, I thought the voice work was pretty strong for the most part.
Yeah. Especially, Guillermo's not an actor. He's a director, And I think he did a fine performance of it. I don't know if people have problem with his accent or what. Like, it was fine. It was fine.
You would think a story set in the Spanish Inquisition, it sort of makes sense that there would be a Spanish guy narrating.
Why the hell not? Why the hell not? The other great thing that I was thinking about with that Bela Lugosi short of the Telltale Heart is what a good idea that was. They had to contact the estate of Bela Lugosi to get permission to do it, but I think that there's probably a vast treasure trove of these old recordings that just want to be animated. I'm thinking of like that 1960s version of the Justice League record that you and I were basically obsessed with for a time. Can you imagine someone just animating that shit?
Or some of the the guy that got really fat and
me
died after the Transformers movie.
Orson Welles.
Oh, you're only mostly fat.
Orson Welles.
You know what I'm talking about? Orson Welles, yeah. Orson Welles did all of those 1930 radio recordings for The Shadow. Right. I think you could animate those. That'd be pretty cool.
Right? Like there's all of this stuff that no one's paying attention to. Maybe it's a nice idea of digging some of this really interesting stuff from the past and bringing it to life. And, it's fun to be in the different visual styles. Because of the old sort of recording scratchiness of the Bela Lugosi segments, I liked that it was all long shadow-based drawings and sort of... It felt like the animation was as aged as the recording. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then we haven't mentioned Julian Sands yet.
Yeah, this is the second bill in the double feature.
I do think he acquits himself much better in this movie, but I have to ask in earnest, like, Julian Sands has been a working actor since the early 80s. How is it that he does not struggle while other actors starve?
He's just got those Julian Sands roles that seem made for him. He looks exactly the same, over his 30 or 40-year career, whatever it is. He looks exactly the same in Warlock as he does in Arachnophobia or whatever. I guess they're not too far apart, but, they're several years apart.
Yeah.
He's just consistently Julian Sands. Or what was that one we saw? Rose Red. Rose Red was like 10 years after Gothic, and he looked exactly the same.
And I remember saying in that review, I'm pleasantly surprised by how I'm not bothered by Julian Sands' performance. This is also a movie that definitely has horror pedigree in it. You got Roger Corman doing a voice, like you mentioned. Guillermo del Toro's doing a voice in it. A lot of people, I think, who are fanboys of Edgar Allan Poe wanted to contribute themselves to this. I'm sure they were getting paid as well. I doubt anybody was volunteering, but there's a lot of interesting names here. Christopher Lee, Bela Lugosi, Guillermo del Toro. I mean, you see those names, the curiosity factor alone would draw a lot of people to it, I think.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about most favorites and least favorites?
Sure.
Because there was the one, I can't remember what it was called. Was it called The Facts in the Case of Mr. Valdemar?
Yeah.
Is that the title of it? I would say for me that was
the best
my
story?
standout favorite. It was animated in the style of those old EC comics, those ones that got banned by the Comic Code Authority a little bit later. For me, it struck the perfect tone between embodying a certain age, like a certain bygone age of horror, without, well, not, I mean, kind of innocent horror, but still, without being too pretentious about it. Like, it managed to be historical, but not pretentious, and I thought the animation, that animation wouldn't have fit the story of, like, Pit and the Pendulum, for example.
Right.
But it did fit that story, and I thought, for me, that was the one where all the stars lined up the best.
Yeah, and it's also the best story, I think, of the group of five. We have The Fall of the House of Usher, The Telltale Heart, Facts of the Case of Mr. Valdemar, The Mask of Red Death, and The Pit and Pendulum. I think of those stories, that is probably the strongest. But it's between that one and The Telltale Heart, just because I really like the Bela Lugosi performance in that. But they're both very strong.
I actually liked, I mean, none of this story came through, but just for the visuals, I liked Mask of Red Death. I think that was my second favorite. It's another one like Gothic, where it would do well projected onto the wall of a hipster bar. You don't really need to know any of the sound or anything. Like, it's not even narrated.
Right, yeah, and it's the one of the group that isn't narrated. It makes it sort of stand out. I also have to go back to the wraparound, this Angel of Death talking to the Raven. It was, I'm pretty sure, originally a Spanish language feature, but it being animated, it was easy enough to switch over. I'm thinking that a lot of that dialogue might have sounded less cheesy and like grating in its original Spanish, but there's something really clunky about the conversations between Death and the Raven. Anytime we cut back to that, I'm like, oh my god, get to the next story.
Well, also the Raven's voice, like, that was just the worst possible choice for voice actor they could have found. Like, it should have been, you know, when the Miyazaki movies get into English, like Howl's Moving Castle or something, the Raven's voice would have been appropriate for one of those, but right. This is like a creepy story, and there's something so, if anybody has seen The Last Unicorn, that may be a bit of a deep cut, but right. it would have been voice quality suitable for that kind of movie.
But it didn't raise the stakes or anything. Your audio...
No, it just didn't sound right.
Your audio just went down a level for some reason. You sound farther away all of a sudden. Did the cord get pulled?
Oh, no.
And now
I don't know. I haven't done anything different, so it's on your end.
Okay.
You're failing as a podcast director.
I think we're coming around to a pretty lukewarm feeling on this movie. It's not something that you can get passionate about and say, no, don't watch it, but it's not something to get so excited about to say, you must watch it. I think that if that list of names and Edgar Allan Poe, if that does it for you, great. I don't know if it does Poe justice. I don't know what does Poe justice. I like Poe, but I'm not like foaming at the mouth over him. But I have yet to see that movie that sort of captures the smugness of the horror in Poe, if that makes sense. Like, there's something about his narrators. They're rich, they're smug, they're like arrogant. And they're telling a story usually of their own downfall, but somehow they're not aware of it.
Well, what I think you need for Poe is to be 19 or 20 years old. Maybe. And it's your first brush with old literature that's kind of interesting. But there is something slightly repetitive, perhaps slightly, like, I actually like his prose, but his stories are like, it's always the same thing. It's somebody that's obsessed. It deals with obsession in the way that, I mean, it's basically an emotion that doesn't really exist the way it does in Poe's stories, but it's all these really obsessed people in implausible situations, and it's good for a certain time in your life, but it's not, I don't really think it's great horror. It's foundational, but I don't think it's all that great.
But it's a primer. I mean, if you if you don't know much about Poe and you want to sort of dip your feet in the water, this is an okay entry point. At some point, do your due diligence and read the stories. But this is like a Poe book with lots of pictures.
Yeah, and I would say, like, I'm being hard on it. I don't think it's bad. There's basically nothing in it that's bad. The animation style for the Pit and the Pendulum it looked a little bit too much like Skyrim to me. I think that kind of computer animation is not gonna age super well. That said, there's nothing bad about it. It's like Principal Skinner said for the diorama contest, the Edgar Allan Poe diorama contest. A little sterile, no real insight. That's what I would say. It's like good, but not that special.
May I have absolute silence?
Sit. Stand. Silence in the corridors and the communal areas. Skirts no more than 2 inches from the ground when kneeling.
If I were a fly on the wall in your house, what would I see?
You're quite an influence on the others. You are not to fraternize with any of these girls.
Who was the first person in your age group to show symptoms?
You all know something is wrong.
We're not kids anymore, Lam.
Have you had sexual intercourse?
Close your eyes. Kiss your lips.
I will not tolerate such conduct.
Crazy witches!
Standards of behavior must be kept.
So, The Falling is a bizarre psychological horror movie set in 1969 at a girls' school where, after a tragic event takes place, a series of mysterious fainting epidemics break out, particularly centered around one girl, Maisie Williams from Game of Thrones. And it seems also to be somehow tied in with her sort of rebellious spirit and her intense relationship with her best friend. Her
agoraphobic mother becomes more and more of a presence.
As we get into it. It's one of these strange movies that's more felt than anything else. I have a little bit of experience in making movies. I've produced a short film. I'm in post-production on a feature film. And I like to think that I may not be a professional, but I know what I'm doing. And I could never make a movie like this. I wouldn't know where to begin. Like, so much of it seems to be built on stacking shots on top of each other to elicit a feeling. Very, very sparse dialogue that gives us information about the characters, but not in a very obvious way. And just a consistent tone of uncomfortableness.
And very minimal plot, too.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, it's these... We're just gonna... Yeah, there's spoilers. You put the spoiler alert.
Spoilers everywhere.
So when Maisie Williams' best friend dies, Maisie Williams sort of faints in class, and then there's like this epidemic of all the girls in her all-girls school just passing out during the middle of whatever activity they're doing. And it even spills over to the art teacher and almost to the headmistress. She just about faints at one point. And then there's the question about, one, what's causing this, but two, are the girls just making it up? Like, are they just... That's certainly what the authority figures believe. And
want to believe. And apparently it's based on true events, and there's like nothing about that explanation, at least to me, that doesn't sound really fascinating. But it's interesting. This is a 100-minute movie, and it feels like a 2.5-hour movie. Like it's like a portrait. They keep on going back to this exterior shot of a pond and a tree and the reflection of the tree in the water. And again, it feels like an art film. but there's real meat to it. There's like a mystery that I want to get into, but I'm not sure if the movie lets me. But I'm curious about it. I'm sort of hungry for it to be maybe more than it is. But it did stick with me. I will give it that. What do you think of The Falling?
Yeah, that's a terrific question. I have no idea what I think of The Falling. So I went online after I'd finished watching it, and I was reading some reviews, and it's the kind of movie that gets a lot of 9 out of 10s and 10 out of 10s.
And a lot of 1 out of 10s.
It gets a couple of like 7 out of 10s. The reviews are really high, and the people that it affects really deeply, and it's definitely doing something right. I personally was quite bored in a lot of points. I kept hoping for something, but this might be one of those movies where it wasn't for me, but it was really good at being what it was. Right. My big note as far as the tone goes is it's like if the movie Heavenly Creatures was a Canadian novel. Right. It's kind of meandering, and there's lots of implicit sighs on like, but it works for some people. It works really powerfully for some people.
There's also a really bizarre musical score. Like, the girls are part of this strange percussion instrument group where they get together and play this music, and then that music sort of fills in the background as we're watching this movie. And again, it sends out a vibe. It's a movie that kind of is strangely hypnotizing, but it's really good at pushing that vibe. But it's a movie that seems so fascinating. Like I said, at the end of the day, I don't know why they're having these fainting spells. Sometimes it seems like it's when they're lashing out, or they're being, they're throwing off the shackles of, being held back. They're embracing their feminism or whatever, and that somehow being defiant triggers a faint. Maybe that's it, but we don't know. One of the girls seems strangely resistant to it, and she almost believes that it's a big fainting epidemic, and then eventually it hits her as well. But I don't understand why it hit her. But it was kind of effective that it did. But what does it mean? And if you want a movie that gives you answers, The Falling's going to let you down. But the director, Carol Morley, I would watch another one of her movies, because I really feel like emotionally she had me on board. Psychologically she had me on board. And me wanting the movie to be more than what it was isn't necessarily what a flaw that she had in the movie. Maybe it was she wanted that sense of wonder. She wanted that inexplicable mystery to just be that.
Yeah. Well, so I'm actually going to... maybe I'll try to tie two things in, because you mentioned the soundtrack earlier, and then the possibility of there being a flaw. For me, I found my note on the soundtrack is I found it actually quite intrusive. Oh, yeah. It was too much, because it was a pop singer who, she went solo vocalist. I can't remember what band she's from, but it reminded me a lot of those late 60s counterculture movies, Jonathan Livingston Seagull being a particularly egregious example, Silent Runnings with Bruce Dern.
Where everything stops for a song.
For a bigger audience, like The Graduate, where Hello Darkness, My Own Old Friend comes on 3 or 4 times, and the whole movie stops just so you can have that. Yeah. And you're like, I get it, director. You're counterculture and you like that song, but it's fighting the atmosphere of the movie in a lot of ways. It's certainly fighting, if you're making a period piece, it's fighting that, but it's just too much. It breaks what the movie wants to be. And that raised the possible specter that this movie has a really stupid, simplistic moral about this kind of oppressive patriarchal society is leading, whenever any girls feel rebellious or creative, then they pass out, which is, it's fine, but that's the kind of thing that you should do in film school. That's well, but I don't know that that's what it is. I just because it had that counterculture late 60s movie vibe, it reminded me of those really stupid, simplistic morals. This is ecological degradation, or this is symbolism. But that was just a specter of that, because I'm not accusing it of that. I'm just saying it kind of opened the door a crack for me.
The weird thing is that could be there for you if you want it. The other thing is that I spent some time thinking that Maisie Williams' character was weirdly being consumed or even possessed by her friend. So much to the point where she almost sleeps with her brother because her friend had been in a relationship with her brother, so now she somehow wants to be in a relationship with her brother. And again, there's no clear answer made with that, like what that whole scene was about. Was she being possessed? Is there something supernatural about it? Like, we don't know. That's another, like, how would you classify this film? Like, it's listed as a psychological horror movie, but...
No way. Drama?
Drama?
Maybe?
Yeah. So, like, it could be that, but it could be a lot of other things. In a way, it's the Bible. It's so malleable. It can be whatever you want it to be, right? And does that make it brilliant or does that make it pointless? If it can mean anything and nothing, then like I guess that's why people respond to it. They get out of the movie what they want to.
So I've been really enjoying the animated show Rick and Morty this season. And this movie kind of reminded me of that. Like, I get that there are people that hate or don't get Rick and Morty, and that's fine. It's not necessarily for them.
Right.
But in my opinion, that show is great. It's brilliant. This, I'm not sure if it's brilliant, but it's like encroaching upon brilliant. But I'm just one of those people that doesn't... It's just not for me. I'm not its target audience. So I found myself getting a little restless. Thankfully, I had laundry to do that night. So after like an hour and 20 minutes, I could do some ironing or something. It didn't speak to me, but I get that it was good. And it's one that there are a lot of people that I would recommend it to.
Right. It's strange. Like, I would almost accuse it of this feedback that I would get sometimes with my writing as a younger fellow. Is like... the audience doesn't have to know what the twist is or what the secret meaning is. If you want to leave it open, you can leave it open. But I feel like at some point the author had to make a decision.
Yeah. And
I don't know if the author made a decision here. I think that it's the same writer-director, Carol Morley. Like, I will give her the benefit of the doubt and say that what she wanted to do was cast this emotional spell of wonder. And if that's all she was doing, then I guess mission accomplished. But if she was trying to tell me a story or make me learn about this mysterious fainting epidemic or give me any kind of answers, she kind of failed.
Well, yeah, but maybe that's the point. Like, I don't think there's any reason to think that she necessarily wanted to tell a story. So, like, if you imagine that all she wanted you to do was feel emotions or think about things a little bit askew or something like that. Again, I don't tend to like purely impressionistic movies, but if that's the movie she was going for, then I think she did what she set out to do.
Yeah.
So kind of like Gothic, this is exactly the movie that it wants to be.
I think that it's more watchable than Gothic, but less engaging somehow. If that makes sense.
Good, nice paradox there. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
I know that doesn't make a lot of sense, but to me that makes sense. I guess this is like the least helpful review ever, but watch The Falling and make up your own mind.
Honestly, this is going to be really dated by the time this podcast drops, but it seems to me a lot like what I'm reading and hearing about the movie Mother,
right?
Which is basically it's either like 4 out of 4 or 1 out of 4. But if this is the kind of movie you like, you'll really like this movie,
right? So if it sounds really intriguing, then give it a try. But if you're looking for a horror movie, if you're looking for something to scare you, I would steer you away. If you're looking for something that's kind of interesting and touchy-feely, then definitely The Falling. Plus, a lot of girls in schoolgirl outfits.
Yeah,
if that works for you.
You're going to get on some lists for this podcast.
I'm on all the lists.
I hoped that no one would ever find cause to open this letter. If you have, I must assume that unexplained or even supernatural events have begun to occur.
Betsy,
appears to suffer from violent nightmares.
That was no nightmare.
Let's see what's happening.
Are we all having nightmares now, Professor?
So here we are again talking about a ghost movie, Matthew. I tricked you into doing yet another ghost review.
You said no ghost, just historical.
Yeah, An American Haunting is supposedly based on true events of the only
And it's supposed to be about a witch.
Yeah, it's supposed to be the only documented case in U.S. history where a spirit was said to cause the death of a man. So it's one of these PG-rated ghost movies that's supposed to be a big date night sort of, weekend opener. The thing that gave it some interesting factor to me is the historical context and the presence of Donald Sutherland and Sissy Spacek as the main sort of husband and wife of the family that we're dealing with. I figure, it looks like just another ghost movie, but surely with that cast and a halfway decent premise, I'm going to have something interesting to see here, right? Right?
Well, and the other thing is, Donald Sutherland will be in crappy movies, but Sissy Spacek, she's kind of respectable.
Yeah. And time was, Lee and I have done this episode where we're talking about 70s horror movies, and he's in two fantastic ones, Don't Look Now and The Invasion of the Body Snatchers, He doesn't look down his nose at horror movies. Donald Sutherland will bring it. And I don't think he sucks in the movie, but I don't necessarily feel like he was passionate about it either.
Oh,
this
I
was
thought
a
he
paycheck.
sucked in the movie.
This was a paycheck performance, and it was on his face. And that's disappointing by itself, because typically I find Donald Sutherland will give you your money's worth if you put him in your movie. So what we fall back on is this ghost story, this riveting ghost story. Why is this Bell Witch spirit, tormenting these farmers, and why specifically their daughter? And how does it relate to this present storyline of a mother and daughter who are moving into a... Oh, sorry. So, I hate to be this mean, but
just 3 for 3 on horrible framing devices, framing devices that didn't need to be there and took away from movies that weren't fantastic to begin with.
About the only positive thing I can say, it's got a good cast, but none of them seem that excited to be there. The production values are fairly strong. There's a couple of memorable sequences of, supernatural events, a horse carriage being flipped over quite dramatically. The period is fairly authentically, presented.
No, it isn't. It's
they're too clean.
It's so horrible. It's so, I think, if you describe any character in it, the only adjective is, they're historical, I guess. They've got these really kind of tortured, I mean, acting-wise, these tortured drawls, terrible accents, no personality, there's lots of historical anachronisms. It's fucking terrible.
It really, really is. And it's hard to, it's hard to describe, how none of this holds together. It seems like all the ingredients for a good movie are present here. But something just isn't connecting. Something's not closing the deal.
Well, I have a theory.
Okay.
It's written and directed by a gentleman by the name of Courtney Solomon.
Yes.
The only other thing he's written and directed is the insane masterpiece Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh my god.
And this is his second best movie.
Well, let's give him this. He's improved.
No way. Dungeons and Dragons was so much better than this. At least it was something. Everything about this sucked.
So, Was Dungeons and Dragons such a hit that someone gave him a big bag of money to create this? Like, now I'm just angry.
No, so he had his own production company, and he produced a ton of movies. All of them were the worst. And then it's kind of like when Seth MacFarlane tries to do something that isn't Family Guy, and it's just the worst, because it's a lot of ego and not a lot of talent.
Right. Well, this idea, this landowner makes a deal with this woman who's got an infamous reputation, and he lends her some money and then, like, basically demands a ridiculous rate of return on the investment. And he gets hung up by the local church. His good name is found to be besmirched, and he has this huge falling out with this lady who very publicly shames him and curses him. Immediately following that, according to the narration of the story, he decides to take solace by molesting his daughter.
Well, I think he might have been molesting her anyway. Like, that was the closest thing to something that was clever in this film, where at the very beginning he mentioned to his wife that she was a deep sleeper and she never even heard him getting out of bed. And then at the end, when we find out she knows that he was a molester, she's like, I heard you.
Right.
So
and
I think the molesting was something that just happened.
We stop liking the Sissy Spacek character as soon as that happens. And although we want to be sympathetic to Donald Sutherland, the more we learn about him, the less that's possible. So then all we have is Rachel Wood, who's playing this as a victimized daughter. And again, I guess some of those sequences, to someone who's never seen a horror movie before, could be described as superficially frightening. But
could they? I mean, it's kind of like this movie is to horror as Bazooka Joe comics are to humor.
Right.
Like, you kind of get where there might be something that technically counts, but it's not. Like,
yeah.
It's just... my final note was, oh God, it's over after like 2.5 hours, and then I checked the running time, and it's only 90 minutes. It's such a long 90 minutes.
And again, this is the mystery of the movie. Like, with that cast and a ghost premise, you'd think that, like, there would be a couple of scenes where, we'd hear the backwood tales of the Bell Witch and be, ooh, that's kind of creepy. Or we'd get anything unexpected. All of the choices seem to be the most easy and obvious, and I didn't find it to be a great intriguing twist that it turned out he was molesting his daughter. In a way, it then made me question, well, then how much of this was supernatural after all is said and done? Was he the first man to be killed by a supernatural? And again,
well, but that might take us to the frame narrative.
Right.
Which is a present-day woman. Is she present day or is this 1970s?
I think it's present to the movie, so let's say 2005 present day.
And her daughter, it starts with her daughter running through the woods, and then she comes home and she's all sick. And then the mother is, like, reading these manuscripts that she found somehow. And so the movie that we're watching are these manuscripts. And then it goes to present day, and then we learn that whatever is happening to her daughter is because she's getting molested by her own father.
Yeah.
And then the last scene is the present day mother, like, the father's getting custody, so he's driving away in the car, and she's screaming and running down the road. And, like, well, phones exist now. Like, call the cops, call him. Like, it's not like he's driving away in a carriage or something. And also her daughter's, like, 25.
Yeah.
It just doesn't have that punch.
For a movie that is, let's just say it then, more about sexual abuse than it is about ghosts, it kind of flinches when it comes to the subject of sexual abuse. Like, is it taking it that seriously? Because I would argue, no, it is fucking not. And in the meantime, it's sure not being scary or suspenseful or engaging. So, like, you gotta justify your existence somehow.
Well, and where I thought it was going to go was with slavery, because the movie is actually very conscious of slaves. Mm-hmm. So in the first trial, like the lawsuit, one of the things, there was something about slaves. Either he ended up taking her slaves because she owed him money, or he lent her slaves and she didn't pay him back. So there's slavery, and then there's slaves that show up every now and then during the various, quote, scary scenes. And like, okay, so this is maybe something about like this unaddressed cultural trauma of slavery, but like, nope, they're just slaves. They just show up and they're slaves.
Again, all of the set dressing would suggest something interesting will happen eventually. And at no point does it pay off even slightly. This is the type of PG horror movie that really pisses me off. Like, it's just, it's product. It's chum the waters and people will swim up. And I resent it because I'm one of the fucking people who swam up. So...
Well, and I resent you because you made me watch it. So.
You would have never seen this movie if not for Rank and Review. You're welcome for that. But our service today, and I like to think that you know, I imagine that there's an audience out there that might take me seriously when I say, if you haven't seen An American Haunting, great. Just stay where you are. Never be tempted by it. If you're channel surfing and you see, oh, Donald Sutherland, Sissy Spacek, oh, right, no, I should not watch this.
No,
like,
you'll regret every moment of not turning that off. There's no life in it. There's no spark. There's no nothing. You can't even, this isn't even the movie necessarily so returning to Gothic, not for everybody, but it was clearly the movie that the director wanted to make.
Right.
This one is just going through the motions.
Yeah. It's not memorably bad. It's such product that it really does feel like a computer wrote it. You know, like it was a permutation, not a creative enterprise. And this whole episode seems to have been made up so far of lukewarm reviews. This is the movie that made me angry.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've seen some bad movies for this podcast, and it's not loudly bad in an interesting way that I could sort of laugh at. It's just soul draining. It's just upsetting to me that it exists. That millions of dollars were spent on making it. It offends me.
This is why I think it's a lot worse than Dungeons & Dragons. Because Dungeons & Dragons, you know, if I was visiting my parents' house and it was on TV and I didn't have anything to do, I would watch it because it's charmingly terrible. But this is just boringly terrible.
You can't laugh at it, and you can't be scared by it, and you can't be interested by it. And with that cast and that premise, this should have been at least okay. Shame on everybody involved.
I think that should be the review on the back of the Blu-ray.
Rank and Review says, shame on all involved. Good enough?
I think we've been a little gentle on it, but good enough.
So, what brings you to Stonehurst?
I've always been fascinated by the troubled mind, since as long as I can remember. I have the desire and the training. All I lack is the clinical experience.
Most patients are here because they are embarrassments to their families. There are few therapies better at restoring the soul than music. Don't you agree, Doctor?
Beautiful.
Interesting case, this one. His family sold him off to a sideshow when he was a child.
Hello?
Suicidal tendencies are not uncommon amongst the deranged.
Did he stab himself in the back as well?
You do not belong here.
Tell me what's going on. How do you know my name?
I am Dr. Benjamin Salt, rightful superintendent of Stonehurst Asylum. When you have found a thing a man fears most, you will have discovered the key to his madness.
Why did you come here?
I came here for you.
So I have this bit of a crush on this director, Brad Anderson.
Mm-hmm.
Session 9 is one of my favorite horror movies. I don't know what it is about that movie, but it gets under my skin. And it's most of the time I find horror movies get diluted. The more you watch them, the less impact you get out of them. But for some reason, Session 9 remains a creepy fucking movie. And I keep on waiting for Brad Anderson to make another movie as good as Session 9. He's made some good ones, he's made some not so good ones, but when I heard about this adaptation of another Edgar Allan Poe story, and I saw this cast, I got excited. And that might have been like a problem. Because I will say that I did like the movie, I did enjoy watching it, and I will give it a recommendation. But to a much smaller degree than what I said about An American Haunting. With this premise, and with this cast, and with this director, I think I was expecting something great, and what I got was something good. I don't know if that's me, or if that's the movie. So I guess I will ask you that question.
Yeah, I had a different experience. I didn't know it was the guy who did Session 8 or Session 9, that the session number that I perpetually stumble over that I thought was a brilliant movie. Off the bat, this movie reminded me of that Guillermo del Toro movie that I didn't like that much, Crimson Peak, was
right?
it?
Yeah.
Where it was like a period piece, but it wasn't... It never really felt like a period piece. Like, it felt like a high budget. You know, they're at this asylum that looks like it was designed by set designers that were trying to come up with this asylum. And I was watching it with my head a little bit askew, not that optimistic. But I gotta say, I was having a little bit of a crisis that I was thinking that maybe I don't like movies anymore, but I really honestly enjoyed this movie. It surprised me quite a lot. And I'll tell you, well, part of it had to do with the fact that I had no expectations, or kind of low expectations.
Right.
But also, I mentioned before in the Edgar Allan Poe review that I liked the story that had the aesthetics of those old EC comics. And for me, this felt like if those old EC comics were a movie. So, like, it wasn't super scary, and it was a little trite, but it was so into what it was. It was so good at being what it was that, you know, in spite of the fact that I don't think it was a terrific movie, I really, really enjoyed it.
Well, and that's the thing, like, it's got an amazing British cast. I guess we should talk a little bit about the plot. Jim Sturgis plays this doctor who comes to Stonehurst Asylum. He'd seen these presentations. It's a famous place where they're doing innovative work on psychology and mental illness for the time. And that's one of the many themes about this, like how people are treating mental illness in the period, and the good and bad aspects of that.
Were there good aspects of that?
Yes, well... he meets the always super attractive Kate Beckinsale, who is a very victimized, put-upon person in the movie. And, yeah, I mean, it's a spoiler-friendly show, but so we'll just get right to it. There's been a change in the staff at the hospital.
That's a good way to put it.
We find out relatively quickly, and that's one of my questions to you, perhaps too quickly, that in the bowels of the hospital, in this sort of dungeon area, the actual staff has been imprisoned, and the inmates have taken over. And this particularly brilliant inmate, played fairly memorably by Ben Kingsley, is actually trying to treat the patients, and in some cases doing a better job of it than the original curator, Michael Caine, was.
In fact, I would say in all cases, the thing that he's bad at is maintaining the asylum, so they're not getting, you know, at some point they're going to end up burning the furniture because they're out of fuel for heat, the food stores are running low, the opium addicts have raided the drug closet, so on a practical level, things are falling apart, but, I mean, the guy that thinks he's a horse, Ben Kingsley, just treats him like a horse in a very respectful way, and that's sort of his general attitude towards the inmates, that, you know, like that there's no reason to torture them or to send them away or anything, just treat them with respect.
Yeah, I feel like
and it was like weirdly touching in some ways.
Yeah, well, I feel like the movie had these two cards to play, right? There was the twist that the inmates had taken over the asylum, and then there was the twist that the inmates were arguably doing a better job running the asylum. But I feel like, in a way, both of those cards dropped a little bit early.
So I would disagree with you there as well, in that personally, like, there are some stories that have really good twists. I've mentioned it before, but the first time I saw the Ring, the Japanese version, but it would have been the same if I'd seen the American one first. The twist at the end of that was terrific.
Right.
Usual Suspects, I think it was a good twist. Sixth Sense, something like that. But the problem with movies that completely rely on the twist, they don't have a huge rewatchability.
Right.
Whereas I tend to like stories that foreground. Like if in the first scene you had the inmates taking over the asylum, as long as you tell that story well, I think it can work.
Right.
Like, the point is not to surprise people. And one of the things that I think it did a good job of was the ambiguity, because there's lots there. Was it a good thing or a bad thing that these guys took over the asylum? Because certainly the treatment of the inmates is a lot better, but the place is also falling apart, and they'll be dead if something doesn't happen soon.
Yeah. They're mentally in a better place, arguably, some of them. I think what I get at, what I like about the movie is the performances. Like, I like that David Thewlis plays this, like, nakedly evil henchman. And, I like Michael Caine has got that classic Michael Caine delivery that makes you want to sympathize with him. But the more you learn about this dude, the more you think maybe he should be in that game. And
also a small but I think huge thing. This is one of the rare movies where the leading lady is almost a full decade older than the leading man.
Yeah.
It's not like some gross 45-year-old that's got some hot 18-year-old love interest.
Yeah. And again, that's where they try to make this late in the game other twist or another card to play, where we find out that he actually came to Stonehurst specifically to find and rescue her, which I don't know. I'd have to go back and rewatch it. I'm not sure if all those pieces fit for me. That mission maybe just got sidelined by all the other insanity.
Can I jump in here?
Please.
Because one of the criticisms I had throughout most of it was like he met her and fell in love instantly, and I just thought it was too quick. Like, I get it. You're both the hottest people in the asylum. You guys are going to end up together, but it seemed like he just decided one day that he was in love with her. But he was also a quote insane person, and he had fallen in love with her long before, and this was his whole plan to meet her and rescue her. So then it made sense how abrupt it was that he fell in love with her, and she certainly didn't fall in love with him.
She was very resistant to him. Very resistant to him. Yeah. It's the performances that make it work for me, and sort of like the how it turns kind of crazy and fun. Like when everybody gets to take turns being the doctor and the patient, and that's has different varying degrees of horrifyingness. When one of the big bad gets his comeuppance, he doesn't just get electrocuted, he gets electrocuted and bursts into flames, right? That's sort of EC comic over the bigness of it. It starts out presenting itself as this very poised costume drama, but I think at its heart it's a much sort of sillier affair even. It's fun,
Yeah, and it was like a nice tonal mix. Like, weirdly, you would think it's a movie... So, like American Haunting, it just thought it was more important than it was or something. It took itself very seriously and had nothing interesting to say.
Right.
This movie doesn't take itself super seriously and has something kind of interesting to say.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Like, I remain a fan of Brad Anderson. I do think, like, he's a guy who can do almost any genre well, and he is able to get a good cast just on the strength of his name. But maybe it's just the problem with when you make a masterpiece that early in your career. I'm thrilled that he had a big box office success with The Call, and that Halle Berry thing helped him to write his own ticket for a little while. But in his collection of movies, that movie is just okay. I think that this movie is much more interesting than that one. But
sorry, the Halle Berry one?
The Call. It was a big hit a couple of years ago that he directed. It was one of the more mainstream things he's ever done, but it helped sort of raise his status a little bit. Because a lot of the smaller movies he makes, like Trans-Siberian, just they're critically, people seem to find them interesting and like them, but they don't find an audience. They just blips on the radar. So it's kind of cool that he was able to make a huge blockbuster hit, so that he was able to put together something like this to follow it up. I'm cheering for Brad Anderson. I don't think this is another masterpiece, but I do think this is worth a look.
Yeah, it by no means is this a terrific movie. I don't even know if I had a friend that was asking, like, what's a really good kind of creepy period piece to watch, I'm not even sure that I would necessarily recommend it. But what I can say is I really enjoyed watching it. I enjoyed watching it way more than I thought I would. Like 15 minutes in, I thought it would be tedious. Completely tonally different than session 8 or session 9 or whatever session that is. I'm making a joke of the fact that I don't remember, but I honestly don't remember. It's one of those two.
Session 9.
But that movie just scared the crap out of me when I watched it. I watched it with you.
Yeah.
You saw me with a blanket on my head like a baby.
You fell apart.
This is nothing like that. But it's good. It's just it's earnest. It's charming.
And I like that it isn't what it presents itself to be right away. Like, again, that feeling that you have, like you know what this movie is, but then the movie isn't what you expect in a way that is good, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It presents itself to be something else, and it becomes this increasingly weird, fun ride. Again, I don't want to foam at the mouth over it, but I continue to be a fan of Brad Anderson. Please check out Stonehurst Asylum.
Yep. I give it a... well, like I said, I don't know if I would actually recommend it, because I could see somebody that's kind of cynical not liking it, and then that ruins my cred. But I naively liked it. Again, I grew up on horror comics. It reminded me of a very enjoyable 90-minute horror comic.
Yeah.
What went we out into this wilderness to find? Leaving our country, kindred, our fathers' houses. For what? For the kingdom of God. Let us pray.
You've cursed this family. Who's there?
So there's been all of this buzz and talk about this horror movie, Canadian-made horror movie called The Witch. And there's always a problem when you hear about a horror movie with a lot of buzz and a brand new director. Is it going to live up to it? What's it going to be? This is one of those horror movies that, as far as I'm concerned, exceeded the buzz that was given to me. Like, I really, really liked this movie. But it's another one of these ones. I mean, we were talking about Session 9, where it kind of, the atmosphere of the piece just soaks into you. It is about, well, it's about a religious extremism, let's be fair, or religious zealots. A group of farmers, settlers, break off from their sort of religious sect because I guess they're not faithful enough, and decide to sort of cut their own life out of the edge of this wilderness and live completely autonomously alone. And the whole movie is presented with this period formal dialogue. It was well researched, and apparently that he took sort of writings from the time to sort of build this text together. So there is something strangely formal about it, and something that's almost holds you back. You're not watching Shakespeare, but there's sort of another layer of separation that asks you to work with the movie, that sort of forces you to listen to the movie. The action sort of centers around the family's children, in particular the eldest daughter, and the suspicion that perhaps she has become corrupt. Either her faith wasn't strong enough, or some force in the woods, perhaps a witch, has taken control of her. Because very shortly after they arrive and start settling in, the baby of the family, while under her supervision, vanishes. And a bunch of dominoes start to fall, and the weight of the situation and their isolation creates this tension that builds and builds and builds to a fairly incredible and unforgettable climax.
Well, and also, just I guess not also, like the tension building, a bunch of gross farm stuff happens with her. Like she drops an egg and it's got a fertilized chicken embryo in it, or she milks the goat and blood starts coming out with the milk. And at one point she tells her bratty brother and sister that she's a witch, and she gives a very creepy monologue, and she's just trying to scare them, we think, but we're not quite sure. But then they tell the parents that she's a witch, and the mom, who seems to have something against her pretty early on, not exactly right from the start, but seems a little bit eager to believe that she's a witch.
Yeah. It's interesting because the supernatural element is absolutely real to them at all times, right? You never have that scene where they question it or doubt it. In fact, the most obvious answer to them is yes, a devil has corrupted our daughter.
But the thing is that the devil is playing along. So there's that scene where the brother is really sick and he might die, so they all go around and pray. But the two little kids start freaking out because they've forgotten their prayers. And that is actually because, as it turns out, they've been... we're not exactly quite sure what their relationship with the devil is, but they had some relationship with the devil, but he's gotten into their brains and they can't remember scripture anymore.
What did they call the goat? Black Francis?
Philip.
Black Philip. Yeah. I really... there's a documentary on the film. It was like, never work with goats. Never work with goats. But for all the time and frustration, it was worth it, you guys, because that goat's fucking creepy.
Yeah, that goat is like after seeing that goat, no wonder goats are the symbol of the devil. Like, there's just enough intelligence and evil in his eyes, and it's just a legit goat. There's no CGI. There's, things that I loved about this movie. There's very little ambient music. There are no bombastic when
almost
the goat
no
is becoming evil. Pardon?
Almost no jump scares. It's not a movie.
Almost no jump scares.
Yeah, it's not a movie about that.
The two little kids,
so good.
like, because creepy little kids is it's a genre that's getting really threadbare, because now it's like scary or like creepy string music in the background where they do something that's supposed to be creepy, but to have them running around being kids, and they've got like this, nobody's paying attention to them, but they've got this Black Phillip chant, the Black Phillip. I can't remember all of it, but if you go back, you can just Google what the lyrics are. It is obviously a prayer to the devil, but if you're not exactly paying attention, it could just be kids doing nursery rhymes. Like, There's nothing in that movie that's like, you will be scared now, but everything just works so quietly together to create such a terrific atmosphere.
Another one of the fantastic things about this movie is, it's very honest about the period and about the people in it and how they are run by their religious beliefs. And in spite of how rough their lifestyle is, and in spite of the strict household that is run with those kids, I really like this family.
Yep.
Like, I care about them. and like, I fear for them right away. There's something about those bare shots of the trees and just how alone and isolated, and how rickety that farm is. Like, it feels like any one of those buildings could just fall over at any time. And they're just trying to make a go of it by themselves because they're not willing to compromise. They're a bunch of fucking Klingons. Like, I probably shouldn't like them, but I do. I really,
well,
really
the thing
do.
is, like, they're humans, right? Like, even though they've got extreme beliefs, they're human. Like, they're a human family that love each other and care about each other. At least at the beginning, take care of each other. And so, like, their weirdo religious beliefs are like, I don't know what, like, it adds to the creepy element because you just know they're going to hold on so hard to those. But it's not like Stephen King religious beliefs where it's like just way over the top and like if you believe in God, you're
crazy. You're
going to be evil or crazy and you deserve to die. I also thought, just when you were talking about the woods, that there's a whole bunch of idioms in English, but like, you know, we're not out of the woods yet or something like that we don't really think too much of. But of course, this is the time where that idiom would have started to exist. And yeah, woods were fucking scary.
Right?
Like, being on the outside of them looking in, that's a scary place. And then when they're on the inside of them, they're even scarier.
Yeah. Question. Early in the movie, we actually see the witch. Like, we cut to this dark place in the woods, some sort of cabin or something, sort of hovel cut out of the trees, and we see this naked back and we hear this muttering sound. And I remember thinking, like, is this too soon? Like, did we want to like leave the entity in the woods as like just the woods, it's just the darkness, it's just the atmosphere? Because a part of me thought, as creepy as those shots were, the movie almost didn't need them. You definitely, when you get to the climax of the movie, you did, but like, the movie seems to be walking this line, like, are they just crazy, or is there a malevolent spiritual force that's making this happen? So, was it a mistake to show the witch that early, do you think?
No, I mean, I'll reiterate what I said with the last review. I really like front-loading. Right. I really like the fact that we're not worried about that maybe this is just craziness or something. Nope, there's a witch. We know what it is. We don't exactly know what they're capable of, but we know they're capable of something bad. And then all of the pieces are in play. Now let's have a movie, a very human movie, where they exist in a world where there's witches out to get them. Oh, turns out to be the devil, but there are also witches around. And like, I for me, it would have really ruined it if it was like the witch ?
Right.
I really liked that there was a witch. I really liked... So there's like a secondary theory that's going on with this movie because as this family is toiling in the wilderness, their corn is rotting. And apparently that kind of corn, when it gets a certain blight, can cause hallucinations. Correct. So there's some fan theories that this is hallucinations. But even before that, like, there's two little kids singing that Black Phillip song. There's nowhere for them to have learned that. Their dad wouldn't have told them that prayer to the devil. No. Like, it's clearly a movie where there's the devil in it, and there's the witches, and the devil is the goat.
Yeah. I mean, to answer my own question, I think maybe showing the witch made us like the family, made us fear for the family more. So that we don't immediately go for that, oh, they're just crazy, this is all just extremism. I think the switch is that we're meant to be sort of questioning and sort of suspicious of the oldest daughter, and it keeps our eyes off of the little kids. The kids, all of them, are amazing actors. The little boy that is sort of the middle child, who is probably the most likable character in the whole movie.
Did you sense any sexual tension between him and his older sister?
There was totally that scene where he was checking out her boobs. Like, he noticed that she was developing. But, again, all of that would just... Sin. He was so built on this faith. As he's laying there delirious and dying from this sickness, he's screaming out all of these, I want to be enveloped in the great love and light of the Lord, and it becomes this terrifying scene. And I don't know how you get a little kid who's, going to be able to understand that material, let alone deliver it to you so effectively. Respect.
Yeah, all of the performances were terrific. The one that... It wasn't even a bad one, because they were all good. The mom, I can't remember the actor's name who plays the mom, but she plays a character on Game of Thrones who is also kind of a crazy mother type. And she seemed to be reprising her role a little bit. She was the one that to me was kind of the least impressive, just because she got so bad so quickly. But that said, like that's a really small complaint.
Yeah, you got to look hard to find some negative things to say. I mean, it's not a jump factory. It's not a spook house type of movie. This is one that sort of works your nerves and gets into you. The actress's name was Kate Dickie that you're talking about.
Yeah, Kate Dickie.
I want to talk about the father. Is it William?
Sure. But before we get there, but just because you said it's not a jump factory, I've seen it twice now. I saw it maybe a year ago or so, and then once for this podcast. Neither time was I really remotely scared, but it didn't really matter. Like if I watched The Exorcist, I wouldn't be remotely scared, but it's a terrific drama.
Right. Ralph Ineson, who plays the father, is asked to do a lot of the heavy lifting with the acting here. Like you say, Kate Dickie is kind of woohoo crazy, but he's the guy who's trying to cut a life out of this earth and who's like sees the rotting corn and sees, the weather starting to change. Like, even if there isn't a supernatural element to deal with, their survival is very much a real thing. And it's on his face. That actor, I think, just so brings it. Like, he doesn't have to say anything. You just look at the way he looks at those kids, and he's so scared and so worried for them. And that's before the shit starts to hit the fan. So
and like there's that nice through line, like when things get bad for him, which is almost all the time, he goes to the woods, or he goes out back and chops wood, because that's the only thing he can do is chop wood. And then we see right before he dies, because he dies on the wood pile.
Yeah.
But the wood pile is just enormous, because whenever he feels hopeless, he chops wood. And he's obviously felt hopeless for the entire time that they've been there.
The stack is as big as the side of the house. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, that goat. I didn't know where the movie was going, but when he gets hit by the goat.
Right, and he's got the axe in his hand. He's about to maybe fight the goat, and then he just kind of shrugs his shoulder, quotes a line from the Book of Job, and it's like, yeah,
you got me.
It sucks.
Yeah, but it's not like it's a survivable wound. This is the time and place. Someone breaks their ankle, that's a fatal injury, right?
No, but what I mean is, even before he gets the wound, like he's about to, he's in like fight mode, and then just the hopelessness of it and his own part in the downfall of his family occurs to him, and he sort of lowers the axe, quotes a line from the Book of Job, and just lets himself be gored.
Yeah. He's failed. He's wanted to protect his family, and he's failed, and he knows it even before the destruction of the family is complete.
Mm.
So, I mean, a lot of people that have got this bloodlust in them that are really looking for a horror movie that has teeth and blood and scares and jumps. That's not this type of movie, but it stays with you. Those final images of this girl, her family completely gone, walking, vulnerable and naked into this night woods. I knew as I was watching it the first time, this is a memorable, important horror movie. This is going to stick around. This is going to leave an impression. I don't think...
And I would say, even though we've spoiled almost every single plot point, it doesn't matter.
It won't diminish it at all.
This is rewatchable.
It won't diminish it at all, because the story isn't what makes it scary as much as the presentation. The spell it casts is grim and creepy as fuck. And that's an impressive and difficult thing for like a professional filmmaker to pull off. This is this dude's first movie. So
I mean, I'll go back to it. It's because he filmed this like a drama, which is I mean, a well-placed jump scare is great, but movies, like, I even thought about it the second time I watched The Conjuring, because I gushed over it for this podcast some time ago, and then I rewatched it, and I knew where all the jump scares were, and without those, it's actually kind of a boring movie, but there's not a single jump scare. This is a really human story.
It's not what it's about, right? It's about getting under your skin, and it's about making you care about this family and then watching its destruction helplessly. But you don't want to turn away from it. You got to see it through, because the movie makes you care and it makes you feel. And when a movie does that, you know, that means it's working. That's what you're trying to accomplish. I don't like feeling the manipulation, I guess, with movies. And that's maybe the thing that pisses us off about jump scares, especially false scares. It's just like, it seems so hardly programmed. Okay, we need at least 3 or 4 of these. We got to time it. So someone hears a noise and they're going to walk down a hallway, and then a cat's going to jump out and go boo. No, it's more complex. It's more psychological than that. And it's not an easy thing to achieve. And the fact that he achieved it with his first feature film, props.
I'm sure it's going to be like Session 9, where, you know, the next thing he does is a high-budget, quote, period movie that's just kind of mediocre.
I'll watch it.
Yeah, I mean, he's got me. This is a masterful movie. Like, even if he doesn't do anything else great again, I'd say great director.
Well done. Okay, we made it through those 6 movies. I don't know if we were particularly grumpy or if it was a weaker list than we're used to, but it seemed like we spent a lot of the time, you know, picking on these movies. And then we got to The Witch and we just gush. So I have the feeling we're going to agree on the top of the list. But tell me, what's the bottom of your list?
Well, I think we're going to agree on that. Actually, just more generally before I get to it, I think we've actually agreed on every single movie. Our rankings might be a little bit different, which is fine, but like sort of we had the same basic opinion of every single movie. So I don't know if we're going to go 6 for 6, but spiritually we've gone 6 for 6.
All right.
Yeah. What's the bottom? Who could possibly guess what the bottom of my list is? As a great man once said of American Haunting, shame on everybody involved. There's not a single good thing about this movie. Don't watch it. It's not even fun bad. It's just a big fucking waste of your time.
It's like the flagship of the lame PG ghost movies. It's just ugh.
Yeah. Well, we've gone back and forth on this before too. I actually think PG is probably the perfect rating for a ghost movie, because ghost movies aren't really supposed to be gory or violent or anything. And you could do creepy with PG, but it's just the flagship for a movie that sucks.
Fail. All right.
Here's where I think we might start to disagree. Next to the bottom, I'm going to put the movie that I didn't like the second last. It's a movie that I didn't mind watching it, but there just wasn't all that much to it, which is Extraordinary Tales. This is a movie that I would recommend to like a high school English teacher who's going through a divorce and doesn't necessarily have the energy to put a lecture together. Like this is like a good insight into Edgar Allan Poe, I guess. Like, you know, this is Edgar Allan Poe. It doesn't really take any chances. There's nothing bad about it, but there's nothing all that great about it.
Yeah.
But number 3, I actually liked watching a little bit less, but I think was more inspired and had more memorable moments. So as much as Gothic got on my nerves a whole bunch, it also had some terrific shots and some terrific set pieces. And I think, I mean, I said that I wouldn't recommend it, and I kind of agree that I wouldn't recommend it, but there's some inspiration there. There's some energy there. Maybe too much at some point, but anyway. Next, I would put The Fallen. I could see another person putting this at the top of their list, or another person putting it at the bottom of their list.
Right.
And so I just thought I would split the difference and put it at the middle of my list. I didn't like watching it very much, but I recognize that there's something to it. Next is Stonehurst Asylum. I was surprised at how much I liked Stonehurst Asylum. I don't necessarily think it's for everybody, but it's fun. It's satisfying. You feel good watching it. It's interesting. Was interesting to me. And then obviously The Witch. I think we just had a big circle jerk around The Witch, and enough said.
Well, we definitely agreed on the top and the bottom. I'm sort of disappointed because I was starting to feel like you were going to renew your championship and upset Karen and really upset Beckman because he's clinging on to his title very covetiously. There might be actual tears when the day comes. Sadly, it's not today. You're right in saying that we agree enough. Like... I don't feel passionately enough about these movies to really, this belongs there, this belongs there. But obviously The Witch is number 1, and fucking obviously An American Haunting is the number 6 place. I got this at a DVD sale. They were 3 for $8. So what's the math work out to there? Like $2 and 60 some cents or something? Or my math is terrible. Not worth it. Do not watch An American Haunting.
Oh, I've got a question.
Yes.
There was that. Was it the Day of the Dead remake?
Oh,
was that the one that you and Jeremy burned? Which is worse?
Contagion pissed me off because it was attaching its sort of wagon to a different franchise and clearly didn't give a fuck about it. So, I mean, I guess it hit me more personally, but it's definitely in that company. So I did put Gothic in 5th place because I don't think it's good. I think it's memorably bad. I think that if you're a connoisseur of this so bad it's good, if you want to see some good actors giving some really hammy performances, and there's so much interesting around the movie that it feels like it should be better than it is, but I gotta be honest, It's kind of a hot mess. Memorably so or not. Gothic I put in 5th place. Extraordinary Tales, not because it's particularly awesome, just because it sucks significantly less than the other two, managed to get to the 4th place. Again, it's kind of the interesting stuff around the movie that makes it worth the time. The fact that it has all these important people from horror involved in the production, and the fact that it is Edgar Allan Poe, and the fact that there's different types of animation. It's interesting enough for people who are interested in it. It's not going to, check all the boxes for the mainstream audiences, but I think if this movie's for you or not. Animated short films based on Edgar Allan Poe. Yay or nay. Right? So it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. I just can't get excited about it, but I don't hate it at all. I put The Falling in 3rd place just like you did. I think I liked it more than you did, but we both said it's good, but there's something we can't put our finger on. I think that maybe it's intentional that we can't put our finger on it, but I still find it vaguely frustrating. And there's something paradoxical about a premise that is absolutely fascinating and a movie that's not particularly engaging. How can it be both of those things at once? And yet that's what it is. So it's interesting, and it makes it to 3rd place. Yep, Stonehurst Asylum's number 2. Love the director, love the cast, love the presentation. It's good enough. It's not a masterpiece, but it's a worthy watch. And The Witch is, I think it's the classic of this bunch of movies. I mean, it's kind of early to call it that. I know it's a pretty brand new film, but it's a very good, very effective, very chilling piece of work. And even though in our typical rank and review, swear-heavy fashion, we've spoiled almost the whole movie if you haven't seen it, even knowing the story, I don't think will diminish the scares or the effectiveness at all. It's just a fucking well-made horror movie. And it's unique, and it deserves number 1. So, there it is.
Yeah, and I honestly, like we disagreed on Gothic and Extraordinary Tales, they're about the same. They're really different, and neither one is great. We didn't go 6 for 6, but we agreed on everything.
Yeah, it's not quite when we did that ghost one, and I put Exeter in second last place. That was that one really bugged me. Like that it would be Exeter. Once again, we're so close, brother. We're so close.
I'm starting to think that this is classic Matt and Larry, because I think the same thing happened on the list that had The Grudge, where it was just like sort of those middling, obviously not the worst, but could go either way towards the bottom.
Someday.
So, good enough.
Good enough. Thank you for returning once again to Rank and Review. We'll keep on putting these out while people keep on listening to them. You'll be back, right? You have
there's some small chance I'll be in Saskatoon for Christmas, and if that were to happen, obviously we would have to do a live show where we don't have the mics cutting out or one of us going.
Isn't it important when you come to Saskatoon that you spend all of that time not actually visiting your relatives but watching horror movies?
It's just the tradition. Yeah, you got to get your, if it's a 4-day visit, you got to get your 12 hours worth of movies that you like 2 hours worth of in.
Well, let's all of us look forward to that. Thanks for being here once again, and that's another action-packed episode of Rank and Review. Is there anything do you want to say anything to the kids on the internet?
No.
Nothing.
No, just keep it up. You guys are doing a great job.
Thanks for interneting.
Keep listening to that show that you're already listening to.
And telling people about it, damn it. And so, sadly, we come to the end of another fantabulous edition of Rank and Review. Thank you for your ears, and thank you for helping to spread the word on this little podcast. Tell that movie friend in your life all about the show. Send that feedback to ranknreview@gmail.com. Tell me how you would rank the episodes. Tell me what you want to hear from the podcast. Tell me anything that's on your mind. Thank you so much. And hope to hear from me again, or hope to hear from you again, or I hope you continue to listen to Rank and Review.